Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm doing a little light plumbing today, but trust me, it has everything to do with guitars. What I'm doing is building a small painting stand or a rotisserie to paint guitars. I've got a project coming up and I'm going to be trying to refinish a body with some paint this time instead of stain, and I think this is really going to help me out. Now before we got started, I got to work cutting a bunch of these parts, and I'll show you a little bit of fast forward motion of that, but basically I've cut out several 6-inch sections, some 12-inch sections, some 15-inch sections, and some 18-inch sections, and this is all 1-inch pipe. I've got quite a few T's, some end caps, and some couplings, but to be honest, there's a million ways you can do this. There is one thing I want to mention, and it's how I'm going to hold the guitar in place. So to actually hold the guitar body, I'm going to use a 1¼ inch poplar dowel rod. The very top section of my paint stand is a 1¼ inch pipe, so this fits inside pretty snugly, but I'm also going to try to add a stop, or basically a big screw, that will help me keep it from turning if I want to keep it steady. This is a 4-foot dowel. I haven't quite decided how I'm going to shape the ends of this so it fits the neck pocket of the bodies that I'll be working on, but we'll deal with that as we go. Now before we get to gluing things together, I just wanted to mention, when I cut this pipe, I just used my trusty old hacksaw. This thing really is old. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not close to 100 years old, but at any rate, any old hacksaw will work, and you want to use a metal blade. You can also cut PVC pipe with some handheld shears that are specific to the task, but I just happen not to have any of those. Then to glue things together, we're going to use some PVC primer and some PVC cement, and things ought to go together really smoothly. Now I'll show a little montage here of me starting to glue the legs together, and I won't show gluing the whole thing. But basically, when you assemble PVC pipe, you prime the parts first, then apply the cement. This really isn't a plumbing video, so feel free to look that up somewhere else online. Effectively, you're just applying the primer and then the cement to the inside of the coupling and the outside of the pipe and shoving them together. Now let's talk just a second about my design. Even though I said there was 1,000 ways you could do this, I do want to point a couple of things out that's unique to my design. I could have chosen a tabletop design or a freestanding design, and ultimately I chose one that was freestanding. The major difference is I can walk all the way around it with no issues. I guess in terms of materials, it does take a little bit more pipe. But effectively my design starts with, obviously, the crossbar at the top, a set of feet that come down from that, some crossbars through the middle for bracing, and the feet are something like this with end caps on the feet. Now all of this through here, the cross beams, the feet, everything in here is 1-inch pipe. But when I get up to this top beam here, this is a 1¼ pipe, because when the dowel goes through here and out the other side, there's very little gap in between the dowel and the sides of that 1¼ inch pipe. Now normally a PVC stand would be quite flimsy. But in my case, what I did to combat that is I filled both feet with nuts and bolts that I had left over, just spare stuff, nails, things like that, anything metal that I could dump in there, and I loaded them up. I poured some epoxy in there to seal it all up and make sure it was all solid and not floating around. And then after the feet were filled, I glued them onto the rest of the frame. Now once you have all that weight in there, and you could probably do this bottom crossbeam as well, it's going to help keep the center of gravity of the stand a lot lower and keep this thing from flipping over if you happen to bump against it, or if you have too heavy of a guitar body hanging off of it. And if my drawing doesn't make sense to you, I promise you I'll show you the whole stand, and it'll make a lot more sense when you see the completed rig. Now if you're interested in the dimensions, these feet are roughly a foot long, a little bit more actually, because the T adds some width. The height of these pipes on the side are roughly about 36, and of course there's some T's in the middle to hold the cross braces. The cross braces are about 15 inches wide, and if you do the math, you can tell I was really just trying to use a 10-foot piece of pipe without any leftover. This top beam is a little bit longer, and like I said, it was its own piece of pipe, so I didn't have to worry about staying within a 10-foot constraint. Now it also has a set of T's that it uses at the top. And then one thing I did just to add a little bit of security was, even though this dowel rod, when it's inserted into this pipe, is almost the same size as the pipe, it still has a little bit of room for movement. So I can turn the guitar body around like a rotisserie, except it doesn't really want to stay where it is on its own. So what I did to combat that is I added another coupling on the end of this. If the guitar body was down here, the weight would all be down here. I thought I'd add some hardware over here just for weight, but also because I wanted a little set screw over here that's actually plugged in that I could turn and tighten the set screw against that dowel that's sitting in that coupling, and it wouldn't turn anymore. I'll show that a little bit more here in a bit. And finally, since the guitar body is always going to be on one side of my stand and the weight is mostly going to be down here, I also filled this entire pipe with bolts, screws, and other stuff, including epoxy. So most of the weight of the stand is on the opposite side of the guitar body. And even with all this metal in this stand, it's still fairly light and not that hard to move around. Now there's also a bunch of ways to mount the guitar to the stand, and I'll show you the way that I chose, which was basically to flatten out a section of the dowel, attach a small block for additional width, and then use a through bolt through the whole thing. This works really well on imported bodies that already have one of those large holes in the middle of the neck pocket area. If I was going to mount a guitar that didn't have that, I'd probably settle for a larger plate that basically simulated the size of the neck. But the nice thing about using a dowel to go through the whole rig is that I can have multiple dowels set up with different neck attachments. So the next project that I'm hoping to get to within the next few weeks is painting this Squire SE body. You can see it had a few too many cracks for me in the front of this neck pocket area, and I just thought it needed to be refinished. It also was one of those ones that had extensive chiseling in this neck pocket area, so I already made some repairs here and some dents at the ends of the horns here. I'm going to try a quick rattle can job just to finish it off and see how that turns out. And if I don't get satisfactory results with that, I may actually move on to a much better painting rig as well. Alright, well thank you all for hanging out with me on this one. I know it's not the normal video, but it was something interesting to me, and I hope you find it interesting as well. I really appreciate all the likes and the comments. Make sure you check out the Hacks Guitar Hobby Facebook group. Thank you all for continuing to use those Amazon links in the description, because those do help me out. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time.